Let's get a little bit more analysis on this, because from Amman in Jordan, we can speak to Gregg Carlstrom, the Middle East correspondent for The Economist, author of How Long Will Israel Survive? The Threat from Within. As we watch yet another strike there, Greg, on Gaza City, and we listen and await discussions within the UN Security Council, what's your initial assessment of what we're seeing? Because, of course, once again, we're seeing this situation play out.
Well, I think what we're seeing in the Security Council, not to totally discount it, but I think almost the more significant meeting that took place today was the Israeli Security Cabinet, which held a meeting this afternoon. It was their second major meeting this week since this campaign began. And the message we heard coming out of the Israeli Security Cabinet, much as we heard on Wednesday when they met on Wednesday, was that this operation is going to continue for a number of days, that a ceasefire is not on the table right now. This is not the right time for a ceasefire. So I think regardless of what it is we hear coming out of the Security Council today, the message coming from Israel is certainly that they intend to continue the fighting for at least a period of a few more days.
And when you write your book, How Long Will Israel Survive? The Threat from Within, just talk us through what you mean by that. I know that you're very interested in what is happening within Israel itself.
Right. We've seen these two separate but related crises or developments this week. We've, of course, seen what's happening between Israel and Gaza, but we've also seen a level of intercommunal unrest in Israel between Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs that is somewhat unprecedented. It's the worst communal violence in a generation. We've seen people from both communities stabbed and assaulted in the streets. Businesses have been ransacked, synagogues burned, homes firebombed. There's been a level of violence between neighbors, between co-workers, between people who have to live together inside of Israel's pre-1967 borders, which in a way is almost harder to tamp down. The fighting with Gaza, unfortunately, it will end the same way it always ends, with a ceasefire that doesn't fundamentally change anything. The blockade will remain in place. Hamas will remain in power. It's probable that this will happen again in a few years, but it's something that can be tamped down in the short term by a ceasefire. This violence inside of Israel, this communal unrest, is something that's much harder to quell once it sort of gets out of control.
So how do you, given the complexities and how long this has been, the tensions have been ongoing, how does one create a solution that both sides will be happy with?
I don't think at the moment one is going to create a solution. I mean, part of the issue is the focus for the past 3 decades of international diplomacy has been on pursuing a two-state solution, beginning with the Oslo Accords in the early 1990s. But we've arrived at a point now where you have, on the one hand, an Israeli government that is quite a right-wing Israeli government, led by a prime minister who has worked for most of his career to try and foreclose the possibility of a two-state solution. On the other side, you have a Palestinian leadership that is hopelessly divided between the West Bank and Gaza, a militant group in control of Gaza that does not accept the two-state solution, and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, which has lost all legitimacy at this point because Mahmoud Abbas has been in power for so long. So the conditions for this two-state solution that has been the focus of international diplomacy for decades, the conditions to try and push for it don't exist. And because it has been the sole focus for decades, there's been no effort to try and consider alternatives.
On that note, Greg, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time, but fascinating to speak to you. Gregg Carlstrom, a Middle East correspondent for The Economist, author of How Long Will Israel Survive? The Threat from Within. Fascinating to talk to you. Thank you.